Okay, so think about setting up a real base on the moon. Not just flags and footprints, but like a permanent outpost, maybe even a small city eventually. What's the biggest hurdle?
Well, it's not just the engineering challenges, surprisingly. It's the sheer cost of getting anything there.
Right. I heard a number that just sounds insane, like €1 million just to send 1 kilogram.
That's about right.
Yeah.
1 million euros per kilogram. So imagine trying to ship up, say, a whole power grid's worth of solar panels.
It's completely impossible. You'd bankrupt entire countries before you even laid the first cable.
Exactly. It's just not a sustainable model if you're relying on shipping everything from Earth. Standard solar panels, the kind we use in space now, they're effective, but they're also relatively heavy and bulky.
So you end up in this kind of Starfleet situation, right? You can't just keep calling for supply runs from Earth. You have to figure out how to use what's already there.
That's precisely the breakthrough we're diving into today. There's this fantastic new research that suggests we can stop shipping the heavy stuff and, well, start using the moon dirt itself.
Moon dirt, seriously.
Literally. The paper is titled Moon Photovoltaics Utilizing Lunar Regolith and Halide Perovskites, and it just came out in the journal Device.
Okay, fascinating. Who's behind this work?
It's a big collaboration. Authors like Julian Mauricio Cuervo-Ortiz, Juan Carlos Ginés Palomares, Sergen Ozen, Enrico Stoll, Stefan Link, and the lead contact, Felix Lang. They're associated with places like the University of Potsdam, TU Berlin, Helmholtz-Zentrum Berlin, a real powerhouse team.
And their goal, what are they claiming is possible here?
They're proposing a strategy that could cut the amount of material we need to launch from Earth by 99%.
99%. Okay, that changes everything. That makes lunar power actually feasible.
It's potentially a massive game changer.
Yeah,
But to really get why it's such a big deal, you have to look at the current problem with space solar power.
right. What are we using now?
The best ones, efficiency-wise, are these things called 3V semiconductor multi-junction cells. They're amazing, really efficient, over 30% power conversion efficiency, or PCE.
So, top of the line, the Cadillacs, as you said.
Pretty much. But here's the catch, the really delicate compromise. To survive up there, you've got micrometeorites hitting them, harsh UV radiation, big temperature swings.
It's a rough environment.
Extremely. So these efficient cells need protection. They have to be mounted on thick, heavy glass substrates. That gives them the rigidity and shielding they need.
So the protection makes them heavy, and heavy means expensive to launch.
Exactly. Heavy kills the budget.
What about the other way, like lightweight solar foils? I've heard of those.
Yeah, those exist. They can reach really high specific power, maybe 1,000 watts per kilogram, which sounds great.
There's always a but.
But they offer basically zero protection. They just wouldn't last on the moon. They degrade incredibly quickly from the radiation and everything else. So you're stuck. Ship heavy and expensive, or ship lightweight and fragile. Neither is ideal for a long-term base.
Okay, so we need a third way, which brings us back to the moon dirt.
Right. This is where the concept of ISRU comes in situ
Yeah.
resource utilization.
Using local resources makes sense.
Yep. And the most abundant local resource on the moon, covering pretty much the whole surface, is regolith.
Which is just the dust and broken rock, the moon dirt.
Basically, yeah. It's this loose, sort of powdery layer on top of the bedrock. And it's everywhere. So the strategy is combine this abundant local material with a super thin, high-performance solar cell technology.
Okay, so the dirt provides the structure and protection, the heavy part.
Uh-huh. And then you just bring the really thin, lightweight, active solar cell layer from Earth.
All right, tell me about making glass from moon dust. That sounds like science fiction. How do they do it?
It's actually pretty clever engineering. They took a regolith simulant fake moon dirt that chemically matches the real stuff from the lunar highlands, called TUDST,
Okay.
and they melted it at really high temperatures, around 550 degrees Celsius.
How do you get that kind of heat on the moon?
You can actually use concentrated sunlight. Think of using parabolic mirrors or Fresnel lenses to focus the sun's rays, basically a solar furnace.
Using sunlight to melt moon dirt into glass. That's kind of poetic, actually.
It really is. And this specific type of regolith simulant, the anorthositic kind, is high in things like silica, alumina, calcium oxide. It's naturally a pretty good glass former.
So the result is this moon glass.
Exactly. And it serves two key purposes right away. One, it's the substrate, the base layer for the solar cell. And two, it's the protective encapsulation, a few millimeters thick.
So you're making the heaviest part of the solar panel right there on the moon from local materials. You don't pay the €1 million per kilo for it.
Precisely. That's where the huge mass saving comes from.
Okay, so the structure's sorted, but what about the bit that actually captures the sunlight, the
Mm.
solar cell itself? If we're saving 99% of the mass, that part must be incredibly lightweight.
It is. That's where the halide perovskites come in. These are a type of thin film solar cell technology.
Thin film, so the active layer is super thin.
Incredibly thin. We're talking about 500 to 800.
Nanometers. Okay, that's almost nothing.
It's minuscule. And this
Yeah.
leads to that wow fact that really drives the point home.
Hit me with it.
Get this. Just 1 kilogram of the raw materials needed to make the perovskite layer, about the weight of a bag of sugar,
Okay.
is enough to fabricate roughly 400 square meters of solar cells.
1 kilo for 400 square meters. That's enough area to power quite a bit.
A massive amount. And think about the other advantage. If you wanted to make traditional silicon solar cells on the moon,
Yeah.
you'd need incredibly complex factories to purify the silicon down to parts per billion levels. That's a huge industrial process.
Right, purification is a big energy hog for silicon.
Exactly. But perovskites are different. They're much more tolerant of defects and impurities.
Yeah.
You can process them at much lower temperatures, under 150 degrees Celsius.
Oh, wow. Much simpler.
Way simpler. And that means the energy payback time, how long the panel has to operate just to produce the energy you took to make it, is way shorter. Maybe just a few months for perovskites,
Yeah.
compared to potentially years for silicon made from scratch.
So they start being useful almost immediately. Less upfront energy investment.
Right. It makes the whole idea of on-site manufacturing much more practical.
Okay, let's boil this down. We use moon dirt for the heavy base and a tiny amount of perovskite material for the active layer. What's the bottom line in terms of power you get for the stuff you did have to launch?
This is really the key finding. They calculated the power per launched mass. So
Yeah.
that's the power output divided by the mass you actually had to ship from Earth, the small amount of perovskite, maybe some contact materials, plus the initial manufacturing equipment.
And the number is
It exceeds 22 watts per gram.
per gram. So 22,000 watts per kilogram.
22,000 watts per kilogram. Compare that to traditional space solar panels. This is potentially 20 to 100 times better in terms of energy produced per kilogram launched from Earth.
20 to 100 times. That completely flips the economics of powering a moon base.
It really does. They estimate that launching just one relatively small, maybe 3-ton equipment line could eventually produce over 3 megawatts of power on the moon.
3 megawatts. That's enough for...
Enough to support a permanent base for maybe around 200 astronauts. So the initial investment in launching the factory pays off relatively quickly compared to shipping finished panels.
Okay, it sounds amazing, but I keep coming back to the moonglass. If it's made from, well, dirt, isn't it kind of dirty?
Yeah.
Like, not perfectly clear. Doesn't that block the sunlight?
You nailed the first big challenge they ran into.
Yeah.
The regolith simulant they used, TUBST, has iron oxide in it, about 1%.
Iron oxide rust, basically.
Sort of,
Oh.
yeah, FeO. And that makes the resulting moon glass darker than standard glass. When they made a 2-millimeter thick piece, its peak light transmission was only about 44%.
Ouch. So if the sunlight has to go through that dark glass first?
The efficiency takes a big hit. In that standard setup, what they call the superstrate configuration, the cell efficiency dropped down to only 8.5%.
Oh.
Not great.
So did they have to figure out how to purify the regolith after all? Get the iron out?
That would defeat the purpose, right?
Yeah.
Add complexity and cost. No, they found a clever workaround using electrical engineering. They flipped the design. Instead of having the light come through the moonglass substrate, they used what's called the substrate configuration,
Meaning?
meaning the light hits the top of the solar cell first, it gets absorbed by the perovskite layer before it ever reaches the dark moonglass base.
Ah, so the darkness of the moonglass doesn't matter as much because the light doesn't have to pass through it to get to the active layer?
Exactly. They just needed to use specialized transparent electrical contacts on the top. They used something called indium zinc oxide, IZO.
And did it work? What efficiency did they get then?
It worked beautifully. With this substrate configuration, they achieved power conversion efficiencies up to 12.3% directly on the moonglass.
Okay, 12.3%. How does that compare to cells made on normal clear glass?
Very comparable. Their control samples on standard glass were the same ballpark, so they effectively engineered around the moonglass darkness problem.
That's smart. Turning a material limitation into just an architectural design choice. Okay, but there's one more big hurdle on the moon, radiation. It's way harsher than even low Earth orbit.
Absolutely. That was the final critical test. They blasted these moonglass perovskite devices with high-energy protons, 68 MeV protons. That's a serious dose of radiation.
What usually happens to solar cells or even just glass under that kind of bombardment?
Well, scanner glass tends to darken. It forms these things called color centers, which reduce transparency and hurt performance. And many solar cell types degrade significantly.
So how did the moonglass devices hold up?
This is maybe the most surprising and coolest part of the research. They showed extraordinary radiation tolerance.
How extraordinary.
The cells built on the anorthositic moonglass retain 99.6% of their initial performance after that heavy proton irradiation.
Whoa, 99.6%. That's basically unchanged. What makes them so tough? Is it just the perovskite?
The perovskites themselves are known to be pretty radiation tolerant, which is good. But there's another twist here related to the moonglass itself. Remember that iron impurity?
The stuff that make it dark? Yeah.
It turns out that the iron, specifically the different charge states, Fe2 plus and F3 plus actually helps suppress the formation of those radiation-induced color centers in the glass.
Seriously, the impurity protects it.
Yes, it acts kind of like the expensive additives, like cerium, that scientists deliberately put into specialized radiation-shielding glass back here on Earth. But on the moon, that protection is just naturally present in the common regolith.
Okay, that's incredible. So the very thing that caused the initial optical problem, which they cleverly solved by flipping the cell design, actually turns out to be a benefit for long-term durability against radiation.
Exactly. The dirt's flaw becomes its strength in the harsh lunar environment. It's a fantastic result for the prospect of long-lasting power systems on the moon.
Wow. Okay, this is really painting a picture of how a moon base could actually sustain itself. So let's wrap this up. What are the big takeaways for everyone listening?
I think there are three main points that really stand out from this deep dive.
Okay, takeaway one. It's all about the logistics. Using local moonburt, the regolith, as the main structural part saves potentially 99% of the mass you'd need to launch from Earth. That fundamentally changes the cost equation. It makes large-scale lunar power actually seem affordable.
Takeaway two, simplicity wins. This perovskite on moonglass approach avoids the incredibly complex and energy-intensive purification needed for traditional silicon cells. You can imagine much simpler, faster manufacturing on the moon with a quicker energy payback. Low purity is okay here, even beneficial.
And takeaway three, built-in resilience. The combination of radiation-tolerant perovskites and this unexpected radiation shielding effect from the iron in the moonglass means these power sources could be remarkably durable and long-lasting, perfect for a permanent settlement. They keep working, close to 100% performance, even after heavy radiation doses.
It really shifts the whole paradigm. Instead of hauling everything from Earth at enormous expense, we start thinking about building with the moon itself. Cosmic resourcefulness.
It's the ultimate in reduce, reuse, recycle, right? Using the literal dust under your feet. It makes me wonder, if we can take something seemingly useless like moon dirt, find its hidden strengths, and turn it into a key part of our future in space, what other abundant, maybe overlooked, or even waste materials here on Earth might hold surprising keys to our sustainable future if we just look at them in a new way?